Like many of you, I'm proud to be an American, but most importantly, I'm proud to be a father and husband, which means it's my duty to protect my family no matter what circumstances are thrown my way, which is why I rely on my Patriot supply. This month, their mega 3-month emergency food kit comes jam-packed with 33 varieties of filling and delicious foods. Not only does that include creamy chicken flavored rice, old-fashioned Italian spaghetti, and savory, cheesy broccoli soup, but you also get a bonus protein kit with diced beef, flavorful chicken chunks, and 3 varieties of beans, plus 9 different fruits, vegetables, and snacks. All in all, this emergency food kit provides a whopping 2,500 calories per day and keeps you well fed and ready for anything. The way I see it, it's my solemn duty as an American and father and husband to protect my family without waiting for handouts. And that starts with food you can depend on that lasts up to 25 years. If you go to preparewitheddy.com right now, you can save up to $300 on your mega 3-month emergency food kit. It ships fast and free. Once again, that's preparewitheddy.com and save up to $300 on your mega emergency food kit supply. Thank you and God bless.
The suicides were sporadic and trickled in for a long time, as if the 22 push-ups were actually working in some invisible life force. Then they would come in waves, more around the holidays, faces of men and women who wore our uniform with pride. Now memorialized on Facebook for us to pass around to each other in sadness and despair. I think this could be a deadly social contagion, for it is possible to not think about suicide when it is all that fills our feeds. Not that all of us contemplating doing it, but we cannot ignore it because it has gone from a trickle to a stream to a river. Some of the most recent were our most resilient titans who we all looked up to for inspiration. Did they feel this decay? Did they feel cheated? And all these years later, who can stop this? So, that was written by our good friend Giorgio Carrillo, who took his life. It's been about a month now.
A little bit less.
A little bit less than a month. And we wanted to open up with that just because obviously today's topic is going to be about suicide. And, you know, as the Truth About Transition series is about what you deal with during transition and when you get out of the military. And I think this is definitely one of the harder topics to tackle and talk about, but it definitely needs to be talked about. This is something that is a reality of what you as a veteran and your spouse will have to deal with when you get out. It truly is an epidemic, and I just think I wanted to read that passage because Gio wrote that not too long after the Afghan withdrawal, and, you know, he was right. I do think there's some valid points in there about it being a social contagion, and I just think that it's ironic that he wrote that and then took his life less than a month ago. So today, we're going to talk about the reality of suicide and just some factors surrounding it and what we have dealt with personally and what our friends have dealt with personally, because Gio's not the only one that we know that has taken his life. But he was definitely one of the closest ones, for sure. All right, I'm going to catch myself here. So, now that we've got over the hard part.
Yeah, I don't think this will be easy. But
no.
Navigating transition is not easy.
No.
I know that you have a lot of stuff you want to talk about because obviously you've experienced it a ton in your career, and unfortunately, after. I feel like we're just gonna be crying this whole thing.
Gather yourself together.
Gather. Yeah.
No, we got it, babe.
Together.
All right.
But as far as, let's start by just discussing, obviously, you indicated he wrote that right after the withdrawal. We saw a lot of the uptick in suicide nationally around COVID. There was a lot of despair. Then with the Afghan withdrawal, what do you think are some of the things, why do military service members seem to have such a hard time finding a purpose, building a new identity after they transition?
Well, I can say from my personal experience of going through, coming out of the military and going through that pain of sort of losing your identity, losing your purpose, or thinking you lost your purpose and identity. I think it's very difficult to commit yourself to something, whether, when you're in the Marine Corps, Navy, Army, whatever, you join for a specific reason. And then if you stay in, especially during the GWAT era, it really was, that's what we truly believed, like, this is what I'm put on this earth for.
Yeah.
You have a very strong belief, and that's just what you were made to do. And so once that is taken from you, or you have to get out and you're no longer part of that group, it's super difficult because the train keeps going and you just stepped off, and now you are surrounded in an area that you have no experience in. You don't know. I felt like I didn't know, up from down for a long time. And I definitely can see, during my time, I definitely had very low lows. And I remember thinking, I was like, I can see why people do this. I can see why people take their lives, because it is super painful and you are lost. And at times you don't feel like there's any way to come out of that hole. And then you also start feeling, I think for me, you start feeling like you're a burden on everybody. Because you're like, I can't fix myself, and I'm just bringing everybody else down. So the only avenue is to just leave this earth. And I think that's where some people get to, and then they make that ultimate choice to leave. But obviously, you and I know, and especially our friends know that are still here, that is probably the most selfish, decision that you can make, because you're passing the pain that you feel onto everybody else. Because I don't think people realize, especially the people that are in those moments that are about to make that decision, how much that they have an effect on everybody else's lives, how much they are loved, and then they just don't feel it at that time. Which is why it's important to, we keep saying reach out and call each other and talk to each other, which is easier said than done, especially when you're out, because everyone goes on their own path, and it's like you're on your own a little bit. You're like, hey, you got to find a way, but that doesn't mean that you have to completely isolate yourself. But I think that's what a lot of people end up doing, especially people that are not married, don't have kids. It's a lot easier to isolate and then just start going down that hole. But I do think the loss of purpose is huge. Because regardless, it doesn't matter if you're a veteran or anything, like, everyone needs to have a purpose. And if you don't have one, then you're sort of wandering in the abyss of life and going nowhere. And I think, just for men in general, like, to speak to that, like, men need a purpose. They need to feel like they belong somewhere and that they're being productive and they're contributing to something. It doesn't have to be the military. It doesn't, it can be any other, a myriad of things that they can do. But I think if you don't have that, you don't have that sense of, like, I'm contributing, I'm protecting, I'm providing, I'm doing what I need to as a man, then yes, you can start going down a dark hole that can lead you to being another statistic.
And we've talked about it. Like, obviously, they've chosen to put the number of 22 a day. And we've talked to a lot of professionals and a lot of people that have been affected by suicide, mothers, wives, and that number has been so far surpassed, I think, in the veteran community. So, I mean, I think at this point they're just trying to attribute something to it to give us a mental picture. But I think the reality is the numbers are probably far exceeding that.
I believe so. Yeah, and I've heard, and the statistics always change.
Right.
Like, it depends on who's talking about them, and it's the 22 a day that's been going on for a long time now. And in my mind, and I was thinking about this the other day when we decided to talk about this topic, and we're not fact checkers. We're not sitting here like, oh, these are the facts. But I can tell you, like, a statistic that I came up with in my head is, like, ask any veteran that's out, do you know someone that killed themselves? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. Yes, I do. But not just yes, but they're going to be like, of course I do. And that right there, that statistic to me is, like, should be way more shocking than throwing a percentage out there. Mm-hmm. Like, it's if you can talk to any veteran and be like, do you know someone that killed themselves? They'll be like, yeah, of course I do. And you talk to someone, a civilian that's never had, was never in the military or had dealt with anything. I wouldn't think there'd be that many civilians that'd be like, oh, of course I do. It's a shock to them. And we've had friends that are civilians, and especially in this past month after losing Gio, they're like, we can't believe, we're very sorry. I can't believe this happened. And they're sort of shocked. And I know you and I talked about this, and I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but just how desensitized you get to it. Where it's like, yep, that's another one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we can tell a marked difference between, I think we refer to each other as battle-hardened veterans as far as, like, some of the more, shocking things to people were like, okay, like, it's just, yes, I think there is a desensitization, and in a way, it's like, you're not only in the military, obviously, we've seen a lot of death that's taken place, whether it's train accidents or on the battlefield or people getting completely maimed. And it's sad to say, but at the end of the day, you've seen tons more than I have personally. And it's like there is, I think, an effect that takes place, and you do get less and less. It's not that there's less of an effect that you care less, but there is a level of a maybe jadedness that you're thinking, yeah.
I think
part of it. This is part of it. It's part of the community, really. It's part of the veteran community. It's part of the military community.
it is. And I think, like you said, it's not that it doesn't, it hurts every time, just the same. I get the same emotions every time one of my buddies kills themselves. It's sadness, it's anger, it's, sometimes guilt, like what didn't I do? And I think our bodies, after you go through that so many times, your body's going to naturally build up a defense system to be like,
Right.
we can't take this pain all the time, or we can't. So it's desensitizes itself. It's like, yep, okay, that's another one, and even that hurts, knowing like I'm not feeling what I should, or I'm not being as empathetic as other people are, that don't deal with this all the time.
Right.
And we just dealt with that a little bit with some family members where they're completely shocked and destroyed, and we're sort of talking them through it like, hey, this is the way it is, and this is what you can expect now afterwards. So I do think there's like pros and cons to it, right? The more desensitized you are to it, the more you're able to think clearly through the situation.
Right. Well, and also, I think our goal all the time in these situations is to be supportive and to be level-headed and to make sure that, we're obviously involved in helping and supporting in the most positive way. But sometimes it looks different to different people. But what do you think in regard to, I know we've talked about this at length, it's like how do you identify, is there anything as far as, we've been dealing with this obviously throughout your career. but what are the things that you think that people can do to identify the signs or build resilient strategies as they're navigating transition? And really just taking this option off the table. I think of it as like, as a couple, like just never say the word divorce, never even bring it up. And that's what I think. There's a lot of rumination around suicide because people are confronted with it all the time. As Gio indicated, we almost idolize these people through social media and things of that nature. I mean, I think there's a little bit of it's a slippery slope, right? And he even
Yes.
said that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any mitigating factors that we can talk about. I don't think we have any answers, but I think just that discussion.
Well, I mean, I think there are signs that you can pick up on that you don't have to be an expert in. But one is the isolation piece. If you haven't heard from one of your buddies in a long time, you don't know what they're doing, then there's probably a problem there, especially if they're very close to you or if you serve with them, and that's the one thing, like when you're if you serve with guys in combat, you have a tie to them that's it's like unexplainable, or it's like you're bonded with them in some way. So if you have that bond and then when you get out and you haven't kept up with that person or haven't talked to them in a while, and even if you've tried to reach out and they're not reaching back, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
And then if you are still talking to them or see them on a case-by-case basis and you see that they're drinking heavily, I think alcohol abuse is huge. What medications are they taking? How many prescriptions are they on? And then just there's the alcohol, drugs, obviously the pharmaceuticals, and then just by their everyday behavior, if they're not acting like they were when you knew them, those are red flags. But that was one of my questions, and the stuff I think about is like, even if you do think you're like, okay, I think this person might be suicidal, how do you bring that up to them, right, without scaring them away or them getting mad at you or whatever, making it's an uncomfortable, obviously, question to ask. Like, are you suicidal? Are you thinking about taking your life? But I think that's the hard question to confront somebody with, especially if they're close to you. And I talked to Dr. Chris yesterday about it, and I was like, I think that's one of the problems guys have is like, I think my buddy's not doing good. I see some things that aren't right, but how do I navigate this so I can talk to him openly about it? Because I can tell you from our community, if you brought that up and like someone's like, hey, I think you're suicidal, that would be like, what? Like, even if maybe you are, nobody wants to admit that openly. But sometimes they do. And that's the hard question, right?
Yeah.
But I honestly think the answer is just being blunt, like, and just coming out with it and just asking them like, hey man, I'm worried about you and these are the thoughts I'm having. Like, are you thinking about killing yourself? And then if that person gets mad at you or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's like, at least you brought it up and you had the courage to ask them.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point we've done a lot to address, and in society in general, we're just a lot more open about mental health. And a lot of this goes back to mental health. It goes back to substance abuse or things that are augmenting people's, decisions. And I think that's really, part of normalizing the conversation is being like, I'm seeing these signs, maybe being more aware of what to look for in people. And again, we don't have really any of those answers, but I think those are some of the things that I think about too. It's almost like you see people struggling, and at the end of the day, it, but then it's like we're all busy. We all have our lives. We all have our various responsibilities. Even if you're checking in on people, I don't think we have a great tool or a great preventer at this point. So maybe just normalizing the conversation, opening up more as a part of the mental health conversation is the only thing that you really can do, because I guess, like you said, if the isolation piece is a big factor and that person is isolating, then the only thing that you have at your disposal is to just constantly making those touches of like, hey, I'm checking in, I'm thinking of you. But again, that can be met with resistance or that can be met with silence,
Yeah.
depending on where the person is in their own mental health journey. But
I will say this. I think if the person is married and has a family, the most honest answer you will get is not from them, it's from their spouse.
right,
And so I would think like if your buddy is married and you're worried about them, my advice would be get a hold of the spouse and be like, listen, I'm worried about him. What's going on? I mean, we said that when I was in the teams. If you really want the truth about what's going on with an individual in your platoon, you need to talk to the wife. Mm-hmm. And that might seem intrusive a little bit, but the reality it is if they are that bad and you're really like, hey, something is going on with this guy,
right.
because here's how the reality is. And I was like this too. It doesn't matter what's going on the home front or what you're dealing with. You could have all the stressors in the world. As soon as you walk into that team room, you're not showing any of that because you are like, I'm good. Let's do the job. And I'm here. I'm ready. Guys they're very good at compartmentalizing and not showing that anything's going wrong at home,
right.
which is why it's always a shock when you see these and like Gio had said, these titans, these dudes that you would think were indestructible take their own life. And then you're like, how did this happen? It's because that individual compartmentalized everything, was not going to let you in on his weakness, was not going to show you any weakness, because that's what we're trained to do. But it's like if you had reached out to the spouse, I guarantee you that spouse would have dumped a whole lot of information on you. Like, yes, this is what's going on. He's drinking all night. He's doing this and this. And a lot of the times, because we've had some spouses come in when I was a platoon chief, and the stuff that they say, and they're not ratting on their husband. They're just as worried.
Yeah.
But when they start telling you, downloading all the stuff that this individual is doing outside, you're like, how is this person functioning?
Right.
How is this person showing up every day and doing the job and then dealing with this on the outside?
Yeah.
And you can only keep that facade up for so long.
Right.
I mean, you can keep it up while you're in the teams or whatever unit that you're in, because the team room or the team when you go there is almost a place of comfort for you. You're like, this is where I can be what I was made to be, and I can leave everything behind. Mm-hmm. But as we know when you get out, that's not there for you anymore. So then when you don't have that place of solace that you've been depending on the whole time to hide all of the stressors and hide all the things that you've been dealing with, and now you're out, now it's on you. Mm-hmm. Now you and unfortunately your family are the ones that have to deal with that.
Yeah. I think if we're being honest, though, I think the vast majority of people, within the military community, we've talked about the statistics, the divorce rate in the SEAL teams is over 120%. And it's a lot of it also comes down to fractured relationships, not addressing issues. Like you're saying, you had that community of support around you, and then you're removed from that. So you have less people that are in your, circle or sphere of influence that you're contacting. So those factors of isolation, I think, are just multiplied because we see so much of the mental health problems leading to whether it's substance abuse problems or abuse, and then fractured relationships, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's I feel like the problems that occur to lead someone to that decision start downstream. So we've talked about it a lot, even with the VA and the prescribing of prescription meds or things that people are looking for answers, but they're also sometimes looking for quick fixes. And
they're looking to numb.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's also part of the scary part is no matter who it's been in the past that we've dealt with, that looking back, it's wow, this was a trending pattern maybe that is hard to say. When did this become part of their conscious where they're obviously contemplating this? And so again, it's very hard to do a mitigation of okay, well, maybe this started 3 years ago or 4 years ago, but then, you just never think it's going to get to that point. But what do you think as far as like resources or VA, or why aren't people going to get help?
Well, I think one is because and I can only speak to, our community, or just the special operations community in general. And even like, the infantry, all that. It's hard for guys to say, I need help. It's just one of those things. It takes a lot of courage to raise your hand and say, I'm not good. Like, I'm broken. I think while you're in, it's a taboo. And I don't care what the military says right now. They're like, oh, we're making strides. No, we're not. If you raise your hand while you're in and say, hey, something is wrong with me, you are outcast.
You're ostracized.
You're ostracized. Yeah, sure, they're going to be like, okay, we'll get you help. You're no longer coming back. You're not part of the team then. You're gone.
Yeah.
You're broken. You go do whatever you need to fix it, but we're going to continue on with you. And that's the last thing dudes want, is they won't leave. They're like, I am staying here, and I know if I raise my hand and say I have something wrong with me, I'm probably never going to be able to do the job that I love, that I've given up everything to do, that I've given so much sweat equity, blood, given my soul to. I'm not going to give that up and raise my hand and say I have something wrong with me. So then they just bury it,
right,
and they keep going on with that. So I think the first step is to raise your hand and say I have something going on with me. Something is not right. And I think people would be surprised if you did do that, how many people will jump to and be like, what can we do to help? Especially when you're out, right? And that's what I've seen a lot of right now is guys, we call it like shooters helping shooters, right? They're forming these groups, these nonprofits and everything to try and, there's armies out there trying to mitigate this right now. Everyone's trying to do their part. We can bring it like Johnny Wilson with NV Mind Health. I think what he's doing is it's super simple and basic, but it's pretty genius to where, yes, it's an app and it's on you at all times, and it will alert if you fall below a certain baseline.
Right.
It alerts your buddy like, hey.
Yeah.
And that forces the conversation right there, because that forces your buddy to call you and be like, listen, dude, I just got an alert saying you're not doing good. You've fallen below certain baselines. What's going on? And even if that person says, no, I'm good. Nope. Then why is it saying this? Why are these statistics coming up? Like, that's the conversation that needs to be forced, and to get people out of those holes, to get people to open up, to be vulnerable, to talk about their issues, and then with no judgment.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. There can be no judgment. And I think that is another problem in our communities too, is we are constantly judging each other. It's just part of the toxic nature of what we do. It's very competition based. So no one wants to. That's another reason no one wants to raise their hand, because and I had that fear when I got out. I was like, I don't want to do certain things because I don't want to be judged by my peers. And in the reality, like after being out now, I'm like, I could care less, right? Like as long as I'm doing what I think is right. But you do have that initial instinct of like, if I do X, Y, and Z, then these people are going to judge me for that. So therefore, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
Or if I raise my hand and say I'm having problems with my spouse, or I'm having, mental issues, they're going to look at me as weak and judge me and probably talk about me behind my back. And I think the reality is when you're out and you do raise your hand, there are so many people out there, because this is such an epidemic going on. People understand. And if you are one of those individuals where someone reaches out or you see something going on, just remember that, not to be judgmental, no matter what that person has done, is going through, no matter what, problems they have, how many drugs they're doing, how much alcohol they're drinking. You need to be able to set that aside or sit down and be like, all right, dude, let's work through this problem. What can we do to help you? And I think, I'll bring up as an example, even with Gio, we had that conversation with him months ago. And we saw some things, and we're like, hey, why don't you go try? And we gave him a resource and go do this. And he went and did it.
He did.
But that those are the things that need to be done instead of just sort of like, oh, all right, he's just being crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's something needs to change.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's definitely hard when you see things in individuals and you do feel a little bit helpless to be like, you want the best, you want them to be happy and healthy, but I mean, life is full of ups and downs, and for many people, again, I think it's the finding the footing, lack of identity and purpose after they get out of the military, and then maybe like some feelings of being slighted or not anymore in that element of you're in that mode with your people, with your group, and then you're disenfranchised. And then like the hit of the Afghan withdrawal for so many was, again, doubling down on whether it was feeling disillusioned, feeling like I have given so much, and then again, going through COVID, I think it did bring up so many mental health issues for people because their whole worlds were flipped upside down, and we experienced that, really a worldwide issue. So it's like, like we talk about, how do you put the toothpaste back in the bottle for some of these people that are on this, path and trajectory? And like, I think that's the struggle, is how can you help someone that you're clearly seeing is on this path?
Yeah, and I don't have all the answers to that either. That's why I think, with even, I brought up the Envy Mind Health, because I had talked to Johnny and a couple people involved, and they're like, we don't know if this is going to work. We don't know, but we have to keep doing something. And I think that's the key, is if everybody's actively trying to mitigate this epidemic and we don't give up on it, then yes, we'll be able to, get forward and hopefully make some positive impact. It's that attitude of like, well, this is just the way it is. And it's like, that's not the answer either. And I see how you can get to that attitude too. Like sometimes I feel like when you're out and you see like all these individuals taking their lives that and you almost feel like you're on a game of Survivor or like a show of Survivor. And you're like, well, I'm still here, like I'm going to keep going. Yeah. And that's not the right attitude either. I almost felt like, even the past couple suicides that happened where I knew the individuals, it's like, okay, I had the desensitized to it. Mm-hmm. But then I'm like, this is how I felt when I was in Buds and someone would ring the bell and you're like, yep, see ya. Like, you're too weak to keep going. And that's also not and I have to catch myself, like, that is not the attitude to have. Like, you need to be more empathetic and figure out ways to solve this issue. And,
I think it's probably a defense mechanism, though, because it is such a troubling issue and there's so many questions surrounding it when someone goes to this extent. So it's like, I think that's probably some just like a protection, just being like, well, I have to just keep going.
Yeah. And I think this brings up another good point too, to like what adds to the epidemic, and sort of like, and this is why I wanted to read Gio's passage here that he wrote, because I've asked myself this too, where you have these individuals that kill themselves, and of course everybody's affected, but then they post it on social media and they're like, oh, this person was such a lot joy, and he lit up the room, and it's like they say all these great things about him. We can't believe but we love this individual, and whatever great things they want to say about him. And I find that that's been a trend for a long time now. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Like, I think when someone kills themselves and everyone around them, close to them, feels the effects of it, that also leads other people to kill themselves, because some people can't take that pain, or maybe that's like the final straw, and they're like, that's it. Like, now I'm going to go that route. But then you also have people scrolling on Facebook or Instagram, and they see these posts of like all these warriors that are like taking their lives, and these people that you would think are like, dude, these are the best of the best. This is the best our country has to offer, and they're offing themselves well, maybe that's a route that I should take too. Or maybe, now they're getting all these praises on social media, so maybe I'll just do that.
I mean, I think with anything, there is like this, it's a odd allure to not feeling the pain, because many people that are, veterans, they struggle daily with managing, whatever, the decisions they've made, mental health, emotional health, things of that nature. But I mean, I think to your point, we've worked with different people in the past that even talking with multiple mothers that have been affected with children that were service members that have committed suicide. And I remember one of my friends was saying it is a contagion. So statistically, when you are exposed to suicide, there is a high probability that someone in their immediate circle will, in fact, within a certain amount of years, kill themselves. And it's like, so when you think of it in that way, and we're talking about this, and we're like, we are talking about it like it's a contagion, because it is.
Yes.
And so I think that that's a scary proposition, to think that, again, we're talking about being desensitized to it, being exposed to it so much. So even if you're just, connected with them loosely on social media, or you saw that person through the medium of social media, if they impacted your life in a way, and, you're then exposed to it. So I do think it is really hard to determine, how do we get a handle on this, and how do we have the conversations around suicide without also at that point, being transparent, but then also sharing in an honest and open way that, like, this is not the answer, and that we need to be exploring how to step in with people, because it's such a huge problem. I don't know where to even begin.
Yeah, and that's, sometimes I think it's almost, the military in me, whatever, the Marine Corps in me, I'm like, to be blunt about it, and to sort of, if someone's acting, out of whack, and they're like, okay, this guy's broken, and, people are like, okay, well, let's see what we can do for him, and they tiptoe around him, and they're like, hey, are you okay? And like, they sort of cater to that individual, which some people need that,
Yeah.
that soft touch and to get them out. But I honestly, from guys from our profession, it's almost like, hey, asshole, like, what are you doing? Like, get out. Are you broken? Well, then let's fix you. Stop being, a jackass, and let's go. And some people need that hard, kick in the ass to, like, and they need that from their buddies. Because that's how we were when we were in. If you were, during training, or even on a deployment, if you were, had some issues, you were acting kind of whiny, like, guys would be like, there was tough love. It wasn't like, oh, hey, buddy, you want to talk about it? It's like, no, dude, get up off your ass, fix yourself, and let's go. Yeah. And sometimes guys need that. But either way, you do need somebody there to help you. And I think that's where it's hard to determine whether to use the soft approach, the hard approach, or I don't know. It's it's a difficult. It's a difficult thing, and I think it's one of those things that it's just overlooked all the time. This we're calling it's an epidemic, it's a contagion, it's happening daily, and it's just not talked about. Until it happens to you. And unfortunately for a lot of us, it happens to us on a pretty common basis. I mean, as far as like the VA, I have on here, is the VA helping or hurting? For me, just the experience I had, the short experience I had with the VA, I can say was hurtful. Just because they right away want to all they know is put you on meds. And I think what people don't realize is all you're doing when you're on meds is you're introducing chemicals to your body, which is going to change the chemical makeup of your body, no matter what you're taking. But if you already have chemical imbalances from the job and everything else, and introducing more chemicals, I don't think is the answer. Right. And I'm not completely against. I realize that antidepressants and all that do work on some individuals, but I think it's like, it's just not even thought about. It's just a go-to. Like, yep,
Right.
take these. And you don't know what that individual's going through
Yeah.
or what he's done to his body and what kind of effect those medications will have. And then we've seen it time and time again where they're like, oh, yeah, I'm on these 3 meds. And then 2 years later, like, well, now I'm on 16 meds because I had all these indications from taking these meds, and now these other meds are helping to deal with those, indications or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so I just don't think the VA is equipped with.
No, and that's why we all have to do more active involvement in some of these, maybe like emerging technologies or emerging things to help to mitigate. But I do also think there is something to the fact of, like, for instance, all these people that have been through the GWAT, it was like their op tempo and that pace, there's just this attraction to, like, they're nonstop. The temperament is to go at a breakneck pace, keep their life at that level, and then they don't necessarily a lot of times have the breathing room or the bandwidth to really do a full assessment of themselves, where they're at, check in, because again, that's looked at as weakness if you raise your hand in the military. So it's like, I think that part of the problem too is what are the things that we could maybe talk about internally with the military that they could be doing a little bit better about having the check-in, so it's not this huge avalanche of insurmountable problems once this person gets out and they're like, now I have to try to repair 20 years of me neglecting myself, but I don't know how that happens.
Well, I think for one thing, I do think I've talked to some guys that are in NSW, some of our friends that are still in, and they have said that they are implementing classes on resiliency and also speaking, talking about mental health. Mm-hmm. Of course, when they were telling me this, I'm like, I know exactly how that's going. You're mandating these classes when these guys could be doing something else, and half of them are in there like, yep, whatever. So, and that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
And they're all young, and you can't blame them for that. They were like, I joined to do the job. But what I think is a good answer, they spend so much time before you get out, and they pride themselves that they've done a better job at this. Is like, oh, we're going to set guys up for success, try to set like the Honor Foundation when I went to try and get them a job, and try to get them assimilated in the civilian world. Well, I think instead of focusing all the time and effort and like, well, let's get these guys a job, let's get these guys going when they get out, it's like, no, how about you have another, it doesn't have to be the Honor Foundation, create something else that's like, no, we are going, a year before you get out, you will show up to these, for 6 months, every weekend or every other weekend or whenever they want to do it, and we're going to talk about the repercussions of this job, what you're about to deal with, and here are some solutions like to it. And I almost like an a la carte of treatments.
Yeah.
Like, and then I think the military and, the biggest complaint, which is not the military's fault, is like the military does a great job of training you and making you a warrior, but they do nothing for you when you get out. Is that their job to do? No. But at the same time, I think they should at least set up something to where it's like, hey, here's an a la carte of treatments. We are going to fund two or three of these. Right. You pick which ones you want, and you will go try these.
Yeah.
And just force guys into that, which right now we experienced it when I was getting out, and we've talked to other people who experienced it. When you get out, there's no time. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, you got to go do your VA stuff. Like, find on your own time, you find that to do that, because they will work you to the bone to the last day you get out. And so I think the military definitely maybe take a step back and be like, all right, a year before someone gets out, let's prep them mentally,
right,
to get and get them healthy. And they should already and don't take "I'm good" for an answer, right, because that's 99% of the time you're going to get that I'm fine.
Yeah.
And don't take it no, you will go talk to somebody, you will go do these treatments, whatever, pick 2,
right,
and then from there, because you've seen it, especially with me, the first treatment you do, and and I was completely like not wanting to, do it. I was one of those guys like I can handle this on my own, which I couldn't. But it's like once you do one treatment, then you're more open to do another one.
Right.
And then once you do two, then you're like, you know what? I want to try a third because I'm seeing progress here. I'm starting to feel like I used to before all these invisible wounds started taking place.
Right. Yeah, and just to bring everybody's attention, obviously, one of the last podcasts that you and I did together was in regard to all of the treatments, all of the things that we did when you were transitioning out. So we're not really going to highlight any of those right now, but there's a lot of amazing organizations, programs, and things like that they can check. So maybe we'll link to that in the show notes. But how do you think there's also this, I think, where guys get out, and you've utilized obviously health and fitness to mitigate the
Yes.
intensity of like your anxiety, depression, things that you've dealt with. But a lot of people you see, like they start letting themselves go. Like you're saying, they start maybe drinking, they're not holding a standard and all of those things. And we keep highlighting drinking. Anything you're doing in excess is obviously on an abusive level of like you're abusing substances or alcohol. Alcohol is just an easy one to highlight. But what do you think that the role in even the person's personal responsibility to themselves, their family, like what does that look like when you're not being told, okay, you have to get up, you have to work out, because a lot of that is a standard that's held in those communities that's no longer implemented.
And so, yeah, that's actually good question and good point to bring up. I think I love we're good friends with DJ and GBRS crew, and I love their be a professional or be a pro. And that's just not like at your job or whatever. It's in life in general.
Right.
Like, or is what you're doing right now being a professional? And I think a lot of the times when guys get out, they lose, like we talked about, they lose that sense of purpose. Well, then once you lose that sense of purpose, then your standards break down. Then it's like, well, no, I no longer have to hold myself to this standard. And that is the complete opposite approach I believe you should be taking. You were a profession, whatever your profession was in the military, all right? That was your profession, and you were held to a standard. The reason you were held to that standard is because that's what made you a better fighter, a better man, a better husband, able to do all these things because you constantly had to focus on holding that standard.
Right.
That should not stop when you get out. And, I mean, that's the mindset I had when I got out, is even through all, like, the trials and tribulations I was going through, I was like, I am still, whether I was a SEAL or I was this, like, I'm a professional and I will conduct myself as best I can in that way. And all you can do is try, and that's why I like they say that be 1% better every day. All I have to do is, am I getting 1% better every day? Give yourself just that one little goal. But you should hold yourself to the same standards as when you were in, like being disciplined, being regimented. I mean, all those things, especially if you spent 20 years being disciplined and regimented, and that's what helped your drive. And if you let that go, then you'll be completely lost. But if you even if you don't have a job, you don't have anything going for you, I'm like, still keep that routine of like, I will get up, I will push myself, work out in the morning, I'll do something to push myself, because if you give yourself those little obstacles to overcome, you're winning. Yeah. Like it can be as simple as, and as corny as that speech McCraven gave, like make your bed every day. It's like even little things like that. Like you get up, I'm going to make my bed. Okay. I just accomplished something. I'm going to I bought that cold plunge. I'm going to get in that cold plunge. I just accomplished that. I just made myself, suffer a little bit.
Right.
I'm going to work out. I can get all those things done in the first hour and a half of my day. I've just accomplished 4 or 5 things. Like those are wins, right? So if you are able to do those things on a ritualistic basis, you are just trending upward. Yeah. Because anything else that is thrown at you through the day, you can at least be like, hey, I've won already, and I can handle these little stressors that are coming at me. But it's when you don't do anything and you let yourself go, and then you're sort of digging yourself into a hole.
Yeah.
And you're like, and inside, I know because I've talked to guys, they want to be the same as they were. It's like, well, you can, but since you have let yourself go, now you have a long, mountain to climb a little bit to get back to where you were. It can be done. But my advice to guys when they get out is like, keep that same disciplined, regimented schedule, right? You don't have to do everything that you were doing in the teams or whatever job that you had, but at least keep some of those things to keep you on point, right? I remember talking to one guy one time, and he had sort of let himself go, and he wasn't looking good, and I think we were doing a shooting course together, and he was like, oh yeah, like sort of making excuses and like, oh, I just I don't know, I just can't find the drive and this and that. And to me, I mean, I was sort of harsh to him, and I was like, well, then you were faking it. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, you were faking it the whole time you were in. I was like, you were just doing it because that's what the job made you do. I'm like, you were a SEAL. That's who you are. This is who we are. And I don't care if you're no longer serving in an active duty role, you are still a SEAL. Like, you should hold yourself to that standard the rest of your life. And, he sort of was like, oh, shit. I was like, yeah, man. I'm like, just because you get out doesn't mean it's over. It's like, you should be proud of what you were. And not only that, people are looking at you like, this guy was a SEAL, so you should hold yourself to that standard. Be the example. There's all sorts of things that you can trick your mind into, being like, okay, pain with purpose, right? Like, I'm going to put myself through this for this purpose. And, your purpose can be as little as, for me, it's like, I want my wife and kids to look at me and be like, okay, he's taking care of himself. He's trying. Every day he's doing something at least, and yeah, sometimes you could do more, but at least you're doing something. Yeah. And you're setting the example for the ones around you.
Yeah. What do you think as far as just for people, obviously it's hard when you get out of that role and in that community and transitioning to civilian life. What do you think are some of the biggest ways that people can be actively involved in either their community or reigniting that form of connection? Obviously, we rely a lot on our faith in order to ground us, give us the principles and the guidelines that we live by. But there's people out there that, if they don't have a good connection or whatever, or they are fundamentally struggling with mental health, it is sometimes hard for people to connect with other people or to put themselves out there. So, I think not only from the outside noticing when people are having that problem and maybe trying to go the extra mile, but like, how do you think that you have successfully navigated to rebuild community when you don't have it at your disposal? Like, your friends are all dispersed now. They're all over the country. Some are still in. A lot of them are out. Yeah. So what do you think people can do to be formulating connections?
Well, one thing you can do is obviously you stay connected with the guys, even though you might be spread out. And that can be as simple as just text messages, just like, hey, man, thinking about you, miss you, whatever. But then if you are separated, is trying to find, and this is hard, is trying to find other individuals that are like-minded that you can sort of create your own tribe where you're at. But that takes some time, but that also takes being open to new relationships, even with people who weren't in the military, right? And that it's difficult for me. It was difficult for me when I got out, and it still is at times, because you don't have that common bond. But that doesn't mean you can't form a relationship with that person. And believe it or not, some of those relationships you form outside of the military are more beneficial for you. Right. Because it sort of opens your aperture to be like, oh, there is all these other things that I can do. And also being able to relate to other people that aren't in the military. Like, everybody struggles. Yeah. Everybody has their own struggles. So, like, finding that common ground with people. But I would also say, the big thing is that tribe that you had were in the military, like I talked about, is just keeping in touch with them and then finding ways to have those get-togethers with them. Like, those are huge for me. We're here, and we're sort of separated from everybody else. But like those times when I get to go, do a shooting course with Joey or like going on a trip and having all the guys get together for 3 days, that high will last you a month of like, okay, I feel my cup is full from, the camaraderie and the brotherhood, and that's what keeps you going. So don't lose touch with people just because you're all the way across the country, and then also take the time to be intentional about, hey, let's meet up. Let's plan a trip that we can all, and it can be a 2 to 3 day trip. Or I guarantee you that will be so much more beneficial to you than just trying to do it on your own.
Yeah.
So for you as a spouse, what advice do you have for spouses when you do see your husband, or it could be your wife, like going through these, you can see them, like, I know they're struggling, but they're not saying anything, or like I did, it's like, I'm just going to keep being miserable and trying to like push through. How do you as a spouse approach that, and then get them to like open up and to get help?
Well, I think that's super hard because I think that person have to see that they need the help, I guess, at the end of the day, because I don't think that you can really force someone if they're not actively trying to get that help. So that's a hard question. I think in our personal situation, just through the highs and the lows, and then I knew that you needed help just regulating your moods and anxiety and depression and stuff like that. And obviously we were separated so much, I don't think I saw how erratic it was. So then all I was doing was trying to navigate, okay, if he has this hard of a time, and knowing that it wasn't your fault, that it's like, this is something that's an internal part of who you are. Maybe it's due to lack of sleep, maybe it's due to imbalances or whatever. So we relied on, professional resources. Again, we talked about a lot of these in that previous podcast, so I would direct people to that. But it's like, I don't think there's a one-stop shop or there's a specific answer. I know for us, like, I was always relying heavily on my faith and just being like, I knew that God's purpose for you is not for you to be, and I hate that word broken too, because I think we talk about this as well. I think they paint the veteran community as, well, you guys are all just broken. And I'm like, that is a label, just like I don't think it's healthy to put labels on children. I think with the veteran community, I think they've taken on that mantle of like, oh, we're just all effed up. And it's like, yes and no, everyone is on a certain level, but I would just say, if you are struggling, it's best, again, to open up. If your spouse is very combative with it, like, again, as a spouse, maybe asking for help from another individual or another spouse that has navigated a similar situation. I mean, that's what we would always go back to. We're sometimes now those people that people come to us, but I think I was reaching out like, hey, what do I do? Where do I go? Where do we turn? How do we make this so this transition into civilian life is not riddled with more pain and trauma? But again, I think that you had to be the one at the end of the day to say to yourself, like, I want this to be different. I don't want to have every single day be riddled with some form of, and I think when we initially did the blood work with the SEAL
Future Foundation,
the guy was like, you are legitimately, your blood work was like, you were stuck in fight or flight. And so we had to really work to balance, and you worked with a professional, but I think it's hard because a lot of people now, they're going to all these different sources, or they're just getting stuff online like, well, this is what will help me, this is what will help me, and it's causing more problems. So I think for us, we always held ourselves to a standard, like, we're not going to take a quick fix, we're not just going to act like stuff isn't happening, we're going to address it, we're going to talk about it, we're going to communicate, we're going to face it head on. again, some of those weren't comfortable conversations, but it was also like, I think you identified you wanted to be a better husband, a better father, and a better person overall, even to yourself. A lot of the stuff was super destructive.
Yeah.
You were very hard on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, when we were going through all that, I mean, and that's where I asked you that question, like as a spouse, because I think that's a difficult place to be in for a spouse, like to watch your significant other like struggle, and you're like, what can I? There's really nothing I can do to get them
Right.
out of this, and you can either talk to them softly, harshly, be as a matter of fact, like this is what you're doing. It's from when I was going through it, it's like none of that. I couldn't process anything. It was like because I had no understanding of like what was actually going on internally. I can tell you the one thing that broke me that I was like, okay, I need to do something was when I went to her room and she was like, I don't want to be around you. And I was like, what? She's like, no, like you're not good to be around. So that was like a punch in the gut. Like, okay, I went back to the closet and I just was like, dude. And then the other thing that it was, I had picked up Ryan from soccer and we're driving back and he just looked at me and he's like, are you okay? And that's coming from an 8-year-old. And so like that right there, like changed the course, because like to hear that from your own children who you're trying to be their hero and you're trying to be someone they can look up to, and then you have them like what I'm telling you, like you need to get help, and you're like, all right, these kids have surpassed me emotionally.
Which is kind of the blessing of, like, again, it's so much more normalized now, the mental health conversations that even we have with our kids, which is like, it is amazing to see that then they get to that point where they have those boundaries and they're like, this isn't healthy.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, that's incredible. Like, you wouldn't even know. But then, I mean, obviously, I think so much of what we do, like, we're trying to model these behaviors. But, I mean, kids know if you're full of it. If you're okay, well, you need to do this, 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 and this, but they see you not doing it. But, yeah, I think those were some of those times where I think it was probably a gut check, but it was also a win in the regard that they were opening up those conversations to be like, this is not okay, to even be able to say that and have an environment where speaking about mental health in our household became a very prevalent and typical conversation where it was like, yes, daddy struggles with this. We all had our different struggles, or we all had these different things. And it was like, we could see some of those things in the kids. Like, we can see anxiety, or like, you need to take time, or you need to rest, or, things that maybe you didn't even allow yourself to do for years, which was like, get the proper rest, get the proper restoration and restorative, which we practice a lot now. Like, sometimes we just chill, and it's like, those are things we didn't even have those capabilities built in. So building in healthy habits too is, I think, a huge part of navigating the transition successfully as a individual and a spouse, but then also modeling that for your kids, like your family. It's so powerful for them to be able to see.
It is
quality time, relaxation.
That gut check was so neat. Like, it was a blessing. Like, the fact our kids are way beyond their years. They've been through a lot, and just to have them say that to me and like give me that gut check was freeing almost, because and I can speak just only to myself. Like, when you're in, in my mind, I'm like, the only people that I care about being a hero to is them. Like, I don't care about anybody else. It's like, if they think I'm a hero and I'm the person they look up to. And I had this facade built up where it's like, no, daddy's indestructible. Right. Daddy can do anything. Daddy's like, and they would go, like, you're a robot, and it's like, but then once I was able to like let that guard down in front of them and be like, yes, I'm human and I have issues that I have to deal with. And it is like this huge weight that came off of me, because I'm like, now I can conversate with my kids
Yeah.
or like have these talks with them, and they'll have the same talks with me and
Yeah.
be open about it. But it's, I think a lot of us, and I would like to think that there's a lot of other guys from my community and just special operations in general think that same way. They're like, I'm the hero of the family. I'm
Yeah.
not only providing, I'm protecting, this and that, and I have to keep up this like facade that nothing bothers me, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect you guys, which you will.
Yeah.
But at the same time, part of being a protector and provider and a good parent is also being vulnerable and letting your kids know that you are human as well.
Yeah.
And the second they see that you are imperfect, I truly believe that the more they love you, because
Yeah.
they're like, you're just like me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think being vulnerable is the perfect thing. Like you said, that vulnerability comes with more strength than it is to stonewall all of your emotions, repress all of them, and act like nothing's fucking wrong. And it's like, okay.
It's just written all over your face.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, anything else that you wanted to touch or address that we didn't?
I think just for maybe some of the listeners out there that, because I know we've got a lot of military couples and just people, veterans in general that we've had reach out and say they listen to the podcast. When dealing with suicide, when they do have a friend or a teammate that has taken their life, what have you found to be the best way to deal with that, the aftermath of it? Because we've seen what it does. And I think it'd be good to sort of go through some of that. And it, again, not that like we're experts and like, here's what you need to do, but this is, I think where we have found ourselves in dealing with it, just like, especially this past incident, I've sort of like been thinking about, I'm like, we're at a spot now to where we're able to navigate this. I mean, it's definitely emotional, but we're able to sort of pull back and start, like, this is how we need to deal with this.
Right.
So what do you?
Well, again, unfortunately, it comes through the hardship of having gone through the loss of like a lot of people, whether not necessarily just a suicide, but I think that exposure when we've seen, friend after friend after friend that we lost, just knowing that everyone handles grief in such a different way. And, again, I think all those emotions show up, right? I mean, some people it's extreme sadness, some it's anger, some it's blaming. And, I think that that's what has allowed us to, like, when this happened, we're like, okay, here we go. Like, and there's a lot of people that we know that the connections that we have, and we're like, it's going to be a lot. There's a lot of intense emotions, especially around any loss, and it seems that my perspective on it and how I want to show up is like, obviously we said very early on, right when we found out, we're like, we are going to have to deal with this. We're we're going to face it head on. We're going to deal with it. We're going to laugh about things when we want to talk about stories, or cry when we see photo, whatever. And we were both just like really present, I would say. And like we were aware to like, you have a struggle one day or whatever. And it's like, I think just allowing that space for your own emotional processing and then being available to other people is like just a huge credit to all of the work that we've done to say, we want to be able to navigate this and allow the emotions to go through so that we can show up and be present for other people that are maybe struggling. And it's not that we're doing everything perfect, right? I mean, everyone's going to handle it in their own way. So I just think that's my top of mind is always, okay, sadly, we've been here before. We've gone through tremendous loss, and we need to be those people that are showing up in a way that can be an example of, we're not going to turn to, substances or blame or create drama. We're going to try to be a part of the healing process of grief, because grief is a very long thing. It does not stop or end in a certain amount of time. It can go on for years and years and years with a loss. So I think that's where we tried to keep our mindset from the beginning. When we found out, we're like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Again, it's sad to say, but I think through the experiential nature of dealing with loss and knowing what a complex just shitstorm it is, no matter what, that we set our sights to show up in a way that we were trying to be a part of solutions and not problems, I
Yes.
guess.
Okay. I think, yeah, that's perfect. I mean, like, and we've said this, like when death comes, and it's different when someone dies in combat or doing the job, right? I think that is a little bit easier to handle because it's like, okay, we know why they died. They died doing what they loved or
Right.
what they signed up for. But when someone commits suicide, and even when they die during combat, whatever,
Yeah.
we've said it, like death brings out the best and worst in people. And what I've seen, especially now being out and then dealing with the suicide epidemic, is not doing the initial response, which a lot of us have, is the blame game. Like, why did they do this? Whose fault is this that they killed themselves? And then getting, like, the anger, the shame,
Yeah.
all of that is you have to realize, and this is, talking to people that maybe fortunately haven't dealt with this
Yeah.
yet, and hopefully it stays that way. But if it does happen, is first, I would say, like you talked about, is allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to feel those emotions, allow yourself to, like, cry, think through, just process it, and that's going to take maybe a week or whatever. I mean, it's not that it doesn't go away, but
Yeah.
it'll get easier, right? But also being able to sort of pull yourself out, disconnect from the situation a little bit, because you're going to have all sorts of other individuals involved, and everybody has their own emotions. Everybody has, their own reasons of why they're feeling a certain way. And then
Right.
people are naturally going to want to, like, why did this happen? Whose fault is this?
Yeah.
And if you're able to sort of disconnect from that, you can help other people navigate that and be like, listen, this happened, and sort of, because people, especially if they really were close to that person, they want to find somebody, they want a solution of, like, sometimes like vengeance, I don't know if it's vengeance, but, like, I want somebody to pay for what
Right.
happened. And it's like, you have to sort of let them, like, hey, they made that decision. There's all sorts of factors why people do it, but at the end of the day, that's their decision they made,
Right.
and we just need to put them to rest and help everybody that's been affected by this, and in the best way that you can. But I think that is, like you said, that comes from experience of going through it over and over. But I would like to just pass that on to people. If you haven't dealt with it and you are going through that, that solution that we've come up with, or the process that we've come up with, has really helped. And it's, it does no good to go into that blame game, shame game. And that, I honestly think that's what we talked about earlier, is the contagion, because now you're feeling all of this pain and anger and everything else, and you can find yourself going down that hole as well. And that's the last place that person that took their life wants you to be.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of those people that take their lives is because they feel like they're a burden on everybody else, and they think that's, like, I want everybody else to be happy, I'm just going to take myself out of the equation. Well, that person that took themselves doesn't want you going down the same route they did, believe it or not. So the only way you can do that is grieve for them, and then how can I help?
Yeah.
What can I do to be part of the solution here instead of the problem?
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a heavy topic. Again, we're not coming with any real answers. We're kind of having the conversation
Yeah.
and just but this is a part of transition. This is a part of our, obviously, story of transition too. And I think the numbers show statistically, with law enforcement, with a lot of the people in service that have a heart for service, their heart and their community, if they are either ostracized through things that happen, or excommunicated, which we deal with our nonprofit. We have met up with many people that feel this listlessness, this loneliness, this loss of identity. And so, I think that we're going to continue to probably try to refine how we've talked about this for so long. Like, what can we do? Obviously, I think at the end of the day, maybe legislation or something affecting veterans or improving mental health or support services could be an answer. That's a big conversation.
Yeah.
I know that we talk a lot with people. So every time this comes up, every time it happens, we go back, I think we want to have action behind it. So I think we're having some of those conversations too right now with people that have been affected by this, spouses, mothers, friends. Like, what more can we do? So obviously it's going to be an ongoing conversation, but I think hopefully this helped somebody out there that has dealt with this, is dealing with it, and feeling the pain, because it's a painful loss when you know that someone got to that point of despair and hopelessness and isolation, that they felt like that was the thing to do. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like you said, we just I think this was a topic that we wanted to just talk about. We are not experts. We don't have the answers, but we do have sometimes it's more than experts or not, is we have the experience.
Yeah.
And we're constantly trying to find ways to mitigate this epidemic, and constantly trying to come up with some sort of solutions. But I will say this, for the listeners out there, I do hope this conversation did have an impact or did help you in some way. But also, if you are a veteran out there listening and you are not doing well, and you find yourself going down that hole, just remember, I can't stress this enough, you are loved. People love you. You probably don't realize the impact that you have on other people's lives. And at the end of the day, Jesus loves you. And that's a no-brainer. Like, you are loved and you belong here on this earth, no matter what pain you're going through. And there are people out there that will help you get through it. Just please open your mouth, say something, be vulnerable, raise your hand, say, hey, I need help. Because there are people here that will help you.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
All right, baby. I love you.
I love you. All right. Out.